24 through 30, finishing the book. So nothing should be in your hands. Yep. Eyes this way. I know some of you can pay attention when you're distracting yourself somehow, but most of us can't. Okay, so just listen to our story. Okay, chapter 24. Where's the prophetess? Sistine asked him as soon as she stepped off the bus. Who's the prophetess?
Willie Mae.
Willie Mae. She was wearing a bright orange dress with pink circles all over it. Her left knee was skinned and bleeding, and her right eye was swollen. Huh? Said Rob. He stood and stared at her and wondered how she could get into so many fights in only half a day of school. Willie Mae, said Sistine. Where is she? She's vacuuming, said Rob. Sistine started walking purposefully toward the Kentucky Star. She talked to Rob without looking back. My mother found out that I was wearing your clothes to school. I'm in trouble. I'm not supposed to come out here anymore. You know, said Rob, you don't always gotta go and get in fights. Sometimes, if you don't hit them back, they leave you alone. She whirled around and faced him. I want to get in fights, she said fiercely. I want to hit them back. Sometimes I hit them first. Oh, said Rob. Sistine turned back around. I'm going to find the prophetess, she said loudly. I'm going to ask her what we should do about the tiger. You can't ask her about the tiger, said Rob. Beauchamp said I ain't supposed to tell nobody, especially not Willie Mae. Sistine didn't answer him. She started to run, and Rob, to keep up with her, ran too. They found Willie Mae vacuuming the shag carpet in room 203. Sistine went up behind her and tapped her on the back. Willie Mae whirled around with her fists clenched like a boxer. We need some answers, she shouted over the roar of the vacuum cleaner. Willie Mae bent down and turned the vacuum cleaner off. Well, she said, look who's here. She kept her hand balled up as if she was still searching for something to hit. What's in your hand? Sistine asked. Willie Mae uncurled her fist and showed Sistine the bird. Oh, said Sistine. And Rob realized then why he liked Sistine so much. He liked her because when she saw something beautiful, the sound of her voice changed, and all the words she uttered had an oof sound to them, as if she was getting punched in the stomach. The sound was in her voice when she talked about the Sistine Chapel, and when she looked at the things that he carved in wood. It was there when she said the poem about the tiger burning bright, and it was there when she talked about Willie Mae being a prophetess. Her words sounded the way that all those things made him feel, as if the world, the real world, had been punched through, so that he could see something wonderful and dazzling on the other side of it. Did Rob make it? Sistine asked Willie Mae. He did, said Willie Mae. It looks alive. Is it just like your bird that you let go? Just about exactly, said Willie Mae. Said Sistine. She looked at Willie Mae. Then she turned and looked at Rob. She said, we need to ask you something. Ask on, said Willie Mae. If you knew about something that was locked up in a cage, something big and beautiful that was locked away unfairly for no good reason, and you had the keys to the cage, would you let it go? Willie Mae sat down on the bed. A cloud of dust rose up around her. Lord God, she said, what you two children got in the cage? It's a tiger, Rob said. He felt like he had to be the one who said it. He's the one who found the tiger, and he was the one who had the keys to the cage. A what? Said Willie Mae. A tiger, said Sistine. Jesus, exclaimed Willie Mae. It's true, said Sistine. Willie Mae shook her head. She looked up at the ceiling. She let out her breath in a loud, slow hiss of disapproval. All right, she said. Why don't you all show me where you got this tiger locked up in a cage? Chapter 25. The three of them walked through the woods in silence. Sistine and Rob chewed 8-ball gum, and Willie Mae smoked a cigarette, and nobody said a word. Lord God, Willie Mae said, when they came up to the cage. She stared at the pacing animal. Ain't no reason to doubt the fierceness of God when he makes something like that, she said. Who was the fool that caged this tiger up? He belongs to Beauchamp, Rob told her. Beauchamp, said Willie Mae with disgust. She shook her head. One person in the world that don't need to be owning no tiger, and that's Beauchamp. See, said Sistine, it's not right, is it? Just like you told Rob about your bird and how you had to let it go. A bird, said Willie Mae. That's one thing. A tiger belonging to Beauchamp? That's another. Tell Rob that he should unlock the cage and let him go, Sistine demanded. I ain't, said Willie Mae. You gotta ask yourself, what's gonna happen to this tiger after you let him go? How's he gonna live? Rob was flooded with sad relief. Willie Mae wasn't gonna make him do it. He wasn't going to lose the tiger. Panthers live in these woods, argued Sistine. They survive. Used to, said Willie Mae. Don't know more. Sistine put her hands on her hips. You're not saying what you believe, she accused. You're not talking like a prophetess. That's 'cause I ain't no prophetess, said Willie Mae. All I am is somebody speaking the truth. And the truth is, there ain't nothing you can do for this tiger except to let it be. It's not right, said Sistine. Right ain't got nothing to do with it, muttered Willie Mae. Sometimes right don't count. I can't wait until my father comes to get me, said Sistine. He knows what's right. He'll set this tiger free. Rob looked at Sistine. Your daddy ain't coming for you, he said softly, shaking his head, amazed at what he suddenly knew to be the truth. My father is coming to get me, Sistine said through tight lips. No, said Rob. He ain't. He's a liar. He's a liar, like your mama said. You're the liar, Sistine said in a dark, cold voice. Her face was so white it seemed to glow before him. And I hate you, she said to him. Everybody at school hates you too, even the teachers. You're a sissy. I hope I never see you again. She turned and walked away, and Rob stood and considered her words. He felt them on his skin like shards of broken glass. He was afraid to move. He was afraid of how deep they might go inside him. She don't mean it, said Willie Mae. She don't mean none of what she say right now. Rob shrugged. He bent and scratched his leg as hard as he could. He scratched and scratched, digging his nails deep, trying to get to the bottom of an itch that was always there. Stop it, Willie Mae told him. Rob looked up at her. Let me tell you something, she said. I would love to see this tiger rise on up out of this cage. Yes, I would. I would like to see him rise on up and attack Beauchamp. Serve him right for keeping a wild animal locked up. Putting you in the middle of this, giving you the keys to the cage? Come on. She grabbed a hold of Rob's hand. Let's get up on out of here. Pay attention. As they walked back to the Kentucky Star, Rob thought about what Willie Mae had said about the tiger rising on up. That's a question on the quiz. The tiger rising up out of the cage. It reminded him of what she had said about his sadness needing to rise up. And when he thought about the two things together, the tiger and his sadness, the truth circled over and above him, and then came and landed lightly on his shoulder. He knew what he had to do. This is kind of like his aha moment here. Okay, 26. He left Willie Mae at the motel and went down the highway. Sistine, he shouted as he ran. Sistine, he screamed. And miraculously he saw her, her orange dress with the pink polka dots, glowing on the horizon. Sistine Bailey. Hey, he shouted. Sistine, I got something to tell you. I'm not talking to you, she shouted back. But she stopped. She turned around. She put her hands on her hips. He ran faster. I come to tell you about the tiger, he said when he caught up with her. What about him? I'm fixing to let him go, said Rob. Sistine squinted at him. You won't do it, she said. Yes, I will, he told her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys and held them in front of her, proudly, as if he had just conjured them out of thin air, as if they had never existed before. I'm going to do it, he said. I'm going to do it for you. Hoo-wee! Somebody screamed, and Rob turned and saw Beauchamp come speeding right toward him in his red Jeep. Oh, no, whispered Rob. Is it him? But Sistine whispered. Rob nodded. Beauchamp pulled over to the side of the road, spraying mud and water everywhere. You out getting your exercise? He hollered. Rob shrugged. Speak up, roared Beauchamp. He got out of the Jeep and came toward them. Rob quickly pocketed the keys. His heart thumped once, loudly, as if it was cautioning him to keep quiet, and then it went back to beating normally. Well, looky here, said Beauchamp when he saw Sistine. You out chasing the girls? Is that it? Man after my own heart. Is that your girlfriend? Beauchamp pounded Rob on the back. "No, sir," said Rob. He looked at Sistine. She was staring so hard at Beauchamp that Rob was afraid the man might burst into flames. "I got more goods for you," Beauchamp said. "I left him back at the motel with Ida Bell." "Yes, sir," said Rob. "What are the goods?"
The meat.
"The raw meat." "What's your name, little thing?" Beauchamp said, turning to Sistine. Rob's heart gave another warning thump. Lord only knew what Sistine would say to Beauchamp. "Sissy," she said. "Well, that's pretty," said Beauchamp. "That's the kind of name worth running down the road after." He leaned over to Rob. "Remember what we got going? You're keeping your manly secrets, ain't you?" "Yes, sir," said Rob. Beauchamp winked and his toothpick wiggled. "I got me some business in town," he said. He squeezed Rob's shoulder hard and then took his hand away. "You and your girlfriend stay out of trouble now, you hear?" "Yes, sir," said Rob. Beauchamp swaggered back to the Jeep, and Rob and Sistine stood together and watched him get in and roar down the highway. "He's afraid," said Sistine. "He's afraid of the tiger. That's why he's making you feed him." Rob nodded. That was another truth that he had known without knowing it. The same as he had known that Sistine's father was not coming back. He must, he realized, know somewhere, deep inside him, more things than he ever dreamed of. "I'm sorry," he said. "What I said about your dad, I'm sorry." "I don't want to talk about my father," said Sistine. "Maybe he is coming to get you." "He ain't coming to get me." Sistine tossed her head. "And I don't care. It doesn't matter. What matters is the tiger. Let's go. Let's go set him free." 27. The first key slid into the first lock so smoothly that it made Rob dizzy with amazement. It was going to be so easy to let the tiger go. "Hurry," Sistine said to him. "Hurry up, get the other locks." He opened the second lock and the third, and then he took them off one by one and handed them to Sistine, who laid them on the ground. "Now open the door," she said, and Rob's heart pounded and fluttered in his chest. "What if he eats us?" "He won't," Sistine said. "He'll leave us alone out of gratitude. We are his emancipators." An emancipator is someone who, sets somebody free to be on their own. Rob flung the door wide. "Get out of the way," he shouted, and they both jumped back from the door and waited. Here's a question. Here's an answer. But the tiger ignored them. He continued to pace back and forth in the cage, oblivious to the open door. "Go on," Rob said to him. "You're free," Sistine whispered, but the tiger did not even look in the direction of the door. Sistine crept forward and grabbed a hold of the cage, and she shook it. "Get out!" she screamed. "Come on," she said, turning to Rob. Help me get him out." Rob grabbed a hold of the fence and shook it. "Get!" he said. The tiger stopped pacing and turned to stare at them both, clinging like monkeys to a cage. "Go on!" Rob shouted, suddenly furious. He shook the cage harder. He yelled. He put his head back and howled, and he saw what the sky above him. He saw that the sky above them was thick with clouds, and that made him even angrier. He yelled louder. He shouted at the dark sky. He shook the cage as hard as he could. Sistine put a hand on him. "Shh," she said. "He's leaving. Watch." As they stared, the tiger stepped with grace and delicacy out of the cage. He put his nose up and sniffed. He took one tiny step and then another. Then he stopped and stood still. Sistine clapped her hands, and the tiger turned and looked back at them both, his eyes blazing. And then he started to run. He ran so fast it looked like he was flying. His muscles moved like a river. It was hard to believe that a cage ever contained him. It didn't seem possible. The tiger went leaping through the grass, moving farther and farther away from Rob and Sistine. He looked like the sun, rising and setting again and again. And watching him go, Rob felt his own heart rising and falling and beating in time. 28. Okay, so they set him free. He's gone. Let's see what happens next. 28. "Oh," said Sistine in the voice that Rob loved. "See," she said, "that was the right thing. That was the right thing to do." Rob nodded, but in his mind he saw a flash of green. He remembered what happened to Cricket. "What?" said Sistine, turning to him. "What are you thinking about?" Rob shook his head. "Nothing," he told her. "Robert!" The sound of his name came floating to them from the direction of the motel. "That's my dad," he said, confused. That's my dad calling me. And then they heard Willie Mae. Jesus! She screamed, her voice high and wild. And then there was a crack of a gun. They both stood still, stunned and silent. And when Willie Mae came running out from under the pine trees, she saw them. She stopped. Thank you, Jesus, she said, looking up at the sky. 2 whole children. Thank you. Come here, she said. She opened her arms. Come to me. Rob started walking toward her. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong. He wanted to tell her that he did not feel whole. But he did not have the energy or the heart to say anything. All he could manage was putting one foot in front of the other. All he could do was keep walking toward Willie Mae. Willie Mae led them back, and when Rob saw the tiger on the ground and his father standing over it, holding the rifle, he felt something rise up in him, an anger as big and powerful as the tiger, bigger. You killed him, he said to his father. I had to, his father said. That was my tiger, Rob screamed. You killed him. You killed my tiger. He ran at his father and he attacked him. He beat him with his fist. He kicked him. But his father stood like a wall. He held the gun up over his head and kept his eyes open and took each hit without blinking. And Rob saw that hitting wasn't going to be enough, so he did something he thought he would never do. He opened his suitcase, and the words sprang out of it, coiled and explosive. I wish that it had been you, he screamed. I wish it had been you that died. I hate you. You ain't the one I need. I need her. I need her. The world and everything in it seemed to stop moving. He stared at his father. His father stared at him. Say her name, Rob screamed into silence. You say it. Caroline, his father whispered with the gun still over his head, with his eyes still open. And with that word, the small sound of his mother's name, the world lurched back into motion. Like an old merry-go-round, it started to spin again. His father put the gun down and pulled Rob to him. Caroline, his father whispered. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. Rob buried his face in his father's shirt. It smelled like sweat and turpentine and green leaves. I need her, Rob said. I need her too, said his father, pulling Rob closer. But we don't got her. Neither one of us. Well, all we got is each other, and we gotta learn to make do with that. I ain't gonna cry, Rob said, shutting his eyes, but then the tears leaked out of him anyway. Then they came in a rush, and he couldn't stop. He cried from somewhere deep inside of himself, from the place where his mother had been, the same place that the tiger had been and was gone from now. Rob looked up and saw his father wiping tears from his own eyes. All right, said his father, holding Rob tight. That's all right. You're okay. When Rob finally looked up again, he saw Willie Mae holding Sistine like she was a baby, rocking her, saying, shh. Willie Mae stared back at him. I don't think it was supposed to be funny. Don't you think you're going to start pounding on me now? She said. No, ma'am, said Rob. He wiped the back of his hand across his nose and slid out of his father's arms. I went and got your daddy, Willie Mae told Rob as she swayed back and forth, rocking Sistine. I figured out what you was going to do. And there ain't no telling what that tiger would have done once he got out of the cage. I went and got your daddy so we could save you. Yes, ma'am, said Rob. He went over and stood over the open-eyed tiger. The bullet hole in his head was red and small. It didn't look big enough to kill him. Go ahead and touch him, said Sistine. Rob looked up. She was standing beside him. Her dress was twisted and wrinkled. Her eyes were red. Rob stared at her and she nodded. So he knelt and put out a hand and placed it on the tiger's head. He felt the tears rise up in him again. Sistine crouched down next to him. She put her hand on the tiger too. He was so pretty, she said. He was one of the prettiest things I've ever seen. Rob nodded. We have to have a funeral for him, Sistine said. He's a fallen warrior. We have to bury him right. Rob sat down next to the tiger and ran his hand over the rough fur again and again, while the tears traveled down his cheeks and dropped onto the ground. 29. Rob and his father worked with shovels to dig a hole that was deep enough and wide enough and dark enough to hold the tiger, and the whole time it rained. We gotta say some words over him, said Willie Mae, when the hole was done and the tiger was in it. Can't cover up nothing without saying some words. I'll say the poem, Sistine said. She folded her hands in front of her and looked down at the ground. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forest of the night, she recited, and Rob closed his eyes. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry, Sistine continued, and what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? To Rob the words sounded like music, but better. His eyes filled up with tears again. He worried that now that he had started crying, he might never stop. That's all I remember, Sistine said after a minute. There's more to it, but I can't remember it all. You say something now, Rob, she said. I don't got nothing to say, said Rob, except for I loved him. Well, said Willie Mae, what I got to say is I ain't had good experiences with animals in cages. She reached into her dress pocket and took out the wooden bird and bent down and laid it on top of the tiger. That ain't nothing, she said to the tiger. Just a little bird to keep you company. She stepped back away from the grave. Rob's father cleared his throat. He hummed softly, and Rob thought that he was going to sing, but instead he shook his head and said, I had to shoot him. I'm sorry, but I had to shoot him. For Rob. Rob leaned into his father and it felt for a minute like his father leaned back. Then Rob picked up his shovel and started covering the tiger with dirt. As he filled the grave, something danced and flickered on his arm. Rob stared at it, wondering what it was, and then he recognized it. It was the sun, showing up in time for another funeral. I'm sorry I made you do it, Sistine said to Rob when he was done. He wouldn't be dead if I had made you do it. It's all right, Rob said. I ain't sorry about what I did. We can make a headstone for him, said Sistine, and we can bring flowers and put them on the grave, fresh ones, every day. She slipped her hand into his. I didn't mean what I said before about you being a sissy, and I don't hate you. You are my best friend. The whole way back to the Kentucky Star, Rob held on to Sistine's hand. He marveled at what a small hand it was and how much comfort there was in holding it. And he marveled, too, at how different he felt inside, how much lighter, as if he had set something heavy down and walked away from it without bothering to look back. What was the heavy thing that he sat down, Ion?
Like all the funerals that happened and like all the bad things that happened in his life.
Yes, and all those things that he
The
was.
suitcase.
Everything in his suitcase. All his emotions and things that he kept stuffing in his suitcase that he didn't want to feel. And then this whole event made all of it come out and he feels better. Okay? Alright, last chapter. That night, his father sang to Rob as he put the medicine on his legs. He sang the song about mining for gold, the one that he used to sing with Rob's mother. When he was done with the medicine and the song, he cleared his throat and said, Caroline loved that song. Me too, Rob told him. I like it too. His father stood up. You're going to have to tell Beauchamp that you was the one that let the tiger go. Yes, sir, said Rob. I tell him I'm the one who shot him, but you gotta admit to letting him go. Yes, sir, said Rob again. I might could lose my job over it, his father said. I know it, Rob told him. But he wasn't afraid. He thought about Beauchamp shaking hands. Beauchamp was the coward. He knew that now. I thought I would tell him that I could work for him to pay for what I'd done. You can offer him up some reasonable kind of solution, said his father, but it don't mean he'll go for it. There ain't no predicting Beauchamp, other than to say he is gonna be mad. Rob nodded. And on Monday, his father continued, I aim to call that principal and tell him that you're going back to school. I ain't messing around with you, taking you to no more doctors. You're going back, and that's that. Yes, sir, said Rob. He didn't mind the thought of going back to school. School was where Sistine would be. His father cleared his throat. It's hard for me to talk about your mama. I would have never believed that I could miss somebody the way I miss her. Saying her name pains me. He bent his head and concentrated on putting the cap on the tube of medicine. But I'll say it for you, he said. I'll try on account of you. Rob looked at his father's hands. They were the hands that held the gun that shot the tiger. They were the hands that put the medicine on his legs. They were the hands that held him when he cried. They were complicated hands, Rob thought. You want some macaroni and cheese for dinner? His father asked, looking back at Rob. That sounds all right, said Rob. Macaroni and cheese sounds real good. That night, Rob dreamed that he and Sistine were standing at the grave of the tiger. They were watching and waiting. He didn't know for what, but then he saw a flutter of green wings, and he understood. It was the wooden bird, only he wasn't made of wood. He was real, and he flew up out of the tiger's grave, and they chased him, laughing and bumping into each other. They tried to catch him, but they couldn't. The bird flew higher and higher until he disappeared into a sky that looked just like the Sistine ceiling. In his dream, Rob stood and stared up at the sky, admiring all the figures and colors, watching as the bird disappeared into them. "See," said Sistine in his dream, "I told you it was like fireworks." He woke up smiling, staring at the ceiling of the motel room. "Guess what?" his father called to him from outside. "What?" said Rob back. "There ain't a cloud in the sky," said his father. "That's what." Rob nodded. He lay in bed and watched the sun poke its way through the curtain. He thought about Sistine and the tiger that he wanted to make for her. He thought about what kind of wood he would use and how big he would make the tiger. He thought about how happy Sistine would be when she saw it. He lay in bed and considered the future, and outside his window, the tiny neon Kentucky star rose and fell, competing bravely with the light of the morning sun.